Okay, this is John Burroughs again, and I'm going to proceed with podcast number 11. It's called Everyone Wants a Mulligan in Life. For those of you who don't know what a mulligan is, it's basically a golf term. Um, I was one of the worst golfers ever, but I'm not going to get into that. What a mulligan is you take a shot, and if you don't like it, you don't have to score it, and you can take another shot. But if you do, you have to score that mulligan. Now, some people play golf where they get one mulligan per round of 18 holes or one mulligan per hole. So in other words, it's a do-over. Okay, so the basis of this story all began about 8 or 10 years ago when I was working for a particular company, and one of my coworkers, who had been married for 14 years, was going through a divorce. And we had gotten quite close. I had worked together with him for probably 2 years at the time. And he looked at me one day at lunch and he said, "If you could do it all over again, would you? Just start over. You don't have no memory of what went on or anything like that. You're just going to begin your life. Would you take that opportunity to do it?" And I told him it was an unfair question because anytime you ask a question about starting over or doing something differently, you have to have a point of reference, something to compare it to. And in this case, what you have to compare it to is your life's experiences. So, what I'm going to do is start from the end, go back to the beginning, and work up to the end. Okay, the term soulmate is being thrown around quite a bit nowadays. And there are various reasons to various people about what a soulmate is. To me, a soulmate is someone who loves you almost more than you love yourself. That knows that there are going to be good times and there are going to be hard times. But the good times will outweigh the hard times. And no matter what happens, whatever life throws at you, whatever hand you're dealt, that person, through their love and devotion, is going to be by your side and try and help you through your problems. And usually a good soulmate does that. Do you only have one soulmate in life? I don't know. You might have two. I'm not going to get into that. The reason why I brought that up is I do not want to change where I am now. I believe I found my soulmate and found not only a spiritual relationship, but a physical relationship, and a relationship that brought a lot of happiness and a lot of challenges and a lot of things that were very hard to go through. But remember, anytime you decide you want to make a change in something, it could affect your future slightly or greatly. So I was very cautious as I got older about making changes. So let's go back to the beginning. First of all, you don't have the choice on whether to make a mulligan until it all depends on the person. But for me, I started making my own choices at 13, 14 years old. I was going to do what I wanted to do and just go for it, So as I go through these choices, I'm going to tell you whether or not I would have done them again, or whether or not I would have changed something, or whether or not, if I could have, whether or not I would want to have changed something and I couldn't, all those type of things, so people understand what the eventual point will be. Okay, so when I was 13 or 14 years old, I started becoming a problem child. I made my own decisions. I think I might have said this before, but if you really want to find that out, go to my other channel, simply called John Burroughs. I'm now just wrote a recent chapter, or just posted a recent chapter about my long involvement with drugs and LSD, and it's about my first trip with LSD. But I made that choice to do that in my life. At that time in my life, you don't think about what's going to go on in the future. You're not thinking about mulligans or do-overs. You're having fun. Your friends are doing the same thing, or at least the friends you chose, and you're having fun and you're moving forward. So we all know we go through stages in life. So I probably kept doing drugs and just being kind of a partier till I was about, I don't know, 22 or 23 years old, somewhere around there. I'm on my third and final marriage because I have met my soulmate. But I don't want to make this podcast too long, but the first person I got married to, her name was Georgia. To be quite frank, she eventually, after 9 years of marriage, we eventually got divorced after 10, but after 8 or 9 years of marriage, she left me for another woman. We tried living together as a threesome, and we tried all sorts of crazy things. Is that something I would like to change in my life? No. That was an experience that taught me so much. And the thing why I married Georgia is I was 19, she was 18. We didn't know shit about maturity. But what I did know, is that she was very vulnerable, came from a real dysfunctional family, was lost within herself, and that appealed to me in such a way that I wanted to more or less rescue her, make her stronger, and I mistook that for love. So, but I wouldn't change that for the world, okay? Also, I took a lot of drugs, all the way from marijuana to back in the day to heroin, and there's certain modern drugs I haven't tried, but pretty much most of them I tried. I got very heavily involved in the psychedelics, LSD, mushrooms, and I really enjoyed marijuana and LSD. My wife asked me the other day, would I do that over? Would I take all that LSD knowing that the effects it's having on me now? And my answer to her is, you darn well bet I would. Because the lessons I learned from taking LSD, the insights it gave me, the better person that it made me is invaluable. That's not going to be true for everyone, but it was true for me. As I got older, and going on to my second marriage, I made a huge mistake. I was more or less on the rebound after Georgia had left me with a Dear John letter saying she had run off with another woman. And I was managing a service station where back in the days when you had gas jockeys that would go out and pump the gas, and as the manager I would go out and schmooze our customers. And there was this one girl that drove in quite a bit. She worked at a real estate office up the street. Her name was Susie. And she had an infectious personality, and she was just a lot of fun. So eventually I asked her out, and that was the first mistake. I would definitely take that back. But since I did, I asked her out. The relationship went on for quite a while. I eventually asked her to marry her, fully expecting, and this is in my book, fully expecting her to say no, and she said yes. So that was a situation where, man, I want a mulligan. I don't want nothing to do with what happened. Her mother was an absolute B. Her family stuck their nose in everything. They really didn't kind of let us live our lives, and she was more interested in pleasing her family than building a relationship with me. Plus, I have to be honest, I had my problems. I was still doing coke. I was still smoking marijuana, but she was a downright alcoholic and didn't want to have kids, and I eventually always kind of wanted to have kids because my father was a merchant seaman, and I never really had a true father figure in my life because he was away, 10 months, 11 months of the year. So that would be a mulligan that I would take. So I was working at the service station, and eventually my brother and my mother started putting pressure on me that I should get out of that business because I worked, 60, 65 hours a week with only Sundays off, only 2 weeks vacations a year, no benefits, and I worked for minimum wage, and I made my other money by selling products and services as the service manager. I eventually became service manager, and I made commission on all sorts of things. So I was working 60 hours a week, which equated to a really good, decent wage for a 40-hour week. But had no benefits, nothing like that. So eventually, I was still married to Susie. My brother and mother convinced me to go to work for the phone company, and I did so. And to make a long story short, I'm really glad that happened. I started out as a technician, became eventually a priority account executive that handled all the major accounts in San Francisco, and also I was temporarily a sales manager for a while. And it is also the place where I met my present wife. We were thrown together on a committee to develop a training program, which I won't get into. That's in my book too. But in developing that training program, she was married at the time, I was married at the time. We had to go out after work and really work on developing it. We also developed it with a committee. After developing it, our mentor came up to us and said, "We'd like you to go on the road and present it to all the locations in Northern California and all the managers and their crews and direct reports in Northern California," which we did. Well, we went on the road together, and slowly but surely we were feeling a connection there. And I can remember the first time she leaned over to kiss me. The kiss was magnificent, but just the touch of her arm, there was something spiritual, something kinetic went off in my head. Something said, this is the person that I'm going to be with for the rest of my life. Okay. So now we're talking about stages of life, and how we go through stages of life. We become different people. Don't kid yourself. After I started going to work for the phone company and met my wife, I eventually phased most drugs out of my life except for marijuana. And we ended up with 2 children that we're very proud of. And the road getting there was really rough and really happy at times. If I go back a ways, there was someone in my life that I was very interested in romantically, but she had a boyfriend. She was 7 years younger than me and had a boyfriend that she had been with for about 9 or 10 years. But we used to, they were always fighting. And I was in between my first wife leaving me and my second marriage. And we would go out all the time. I mean, we had a common interest aside from drugs, but we would talk to all hours of the evening, and there was clearly a connection there, and she was someone that I still think of today. But here's one of the things that if she had ever broke up with her boyfriend, then that might have changed the whole course of my life, because I think we would have ended up in a relationship that probably would have led to marriage. But I knew she was committed to her boyfriend, so I didn't push it that hard. So that's where you just don't want a mulligan. So anyway, I've gotten into my career at Pacific Bell. My wife has saved my life from, my present wife has saved my life from drugs. We have 2 kids. We're living in California. California is starting to become the most expensive place in the world you can live. Nowadays, it's the most expensive place and worst place in the world you can live, probably in the United States. But we were watching the prices of real estate and stuff like that, and there were buyout offers going on at Pacific Bell, and we were waiting for the right offer. We had traveled all over the Southwest, because that's where we wanted to make our new home. We eventually ended up in southern Arizona, and we took an offer that was kind of too good to refuse, which allowed us to do certain things. Through my relationship with my present wife, I think I've told you before, I had anger management problems, severe anger management problems, and I put my family through that, and it's one of the big regrets of my life. So before I go on any further, if I could get a mulligan on my temper, my anger management, I would take it, but unfortunately I can't. So we eventually, fought through it. And you need to know that there was a 12-year difference. I'm 12 years older than my wife. And I'm now 70 years old. So at this stage of life, that gap has caused a lot of misunderstandings. Not arguments, but just misunderstandings, because I'm at a point in my life where I'm becoming more and more philosophical, more and more laid back, and yet I do want to do things. I want more than ever to please her, and I put her through hell. But one thing all men will tell you that get into any type of long-term relationship is that once you've been together for a while, after all the moonlight and stars and roses and candy, it comes down to real life, and that the woman starts to try and mold the man into some form or shape that she wants that person to be. I'm not saying men don't do it, but I believe it's more prevalent in women. And it becomes kind of a sticky point, because I'll venture to say, without having any facts to back it up, that everyone thinks that they know themselves and what's right for themselves better than anyone else. Everyone thinks that. And most people think that they know what's right for other people, no matter how much they know about the situation or not, no matter how close they are to it or not. And that's a very hard thing to deal with because miscommunications start happening, and you end up with going through long periods of sadness, long periods of misunderstanding. But in the end, the happy part is we made it through all that. And I would have liked to take a mulligan on my anger management. I'd still like to take a mulligan on my insecurities. I grow more insecure the older I get. And that causes a problem because I get nervous when I think something might have happened. And it's not a rational fear, it's an irrational fear, but it's hard to deal with. So I wish I could take a mulligan on that. I also wish I could take a mulligan on my age. I wish I was younger when I met my wife, because that age separation has caused a lot of minor differences between us. So I can go on forever with this, and I'm not going to. So let me bring us back to the end. Here's some of the things that I've learned through the course of my life. Number one, we're all different, and yet in some ways we're the same. First thing I've learned is I don't think I've ever known a person that at one point who is married and at one point has never said to me, a person that's close to me, has never said to me, oh, I love my wife, everything's perfect. No, I've heard everything isn't perfect, and nor should it be, because nothing is perfect. But I would tell you that you probably want to do some real soul searching coming from someone with experience before you marry anyone, because there are going to be times of unbelievable happiness and times of just down and contempt almost. But for me, it's well worth it, because you never know if you're going to find that again. And it would be a great mistake if you found it and passed it up. It's also a bigger mistake if you think you found it and you really haven't. So you know who you are. And when you're dealing or getting ready to get into a relationship, there's questions you need to ask, there's talks you need to have, things you have to do to prepare you for the future. Now, the last thing I want to say is this. And this, I'm not trying to hurt anybody with this or anything like that, but I know a lot of people, not a lot, but I know a lot of guys anyway, a few girls, that got in some long-term relationships, never really got married, never got really, really serious about anyone. They basically wanted to be on their own. They didn't want the responsibility of another person. They didn't want the responsibility of children. Me, I did. I didn't realize how challenging it could be. But there are people that also, by watching other people, learned that, like the old book that was written, I forget if I'm saying the title right, but Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, or whatever that is. That is a true statement. Men are really different from women in the way they apply their logic, in the way they communicate, in the way they think about the future, in a lot of ways. And if I lived or was born in today's society, and let's say I was 38 years old again when I met my wife, just prior to meeting my wife, before I met my wife, I think I would want a do-over. And even though as much as I wanted children and to be a father, I think sometimes it's so much easier to only be responsible for yourself, not have to think about anybody else. Not because you don't love them, it's because you love them so much that they affect your thoughts every single day. And so I think in many ways, if you look at the divorce rate and you look at everything that's going on, in many ways in today's world, I would recommend that young people first explore living alone as long as they can, seeing that's like, and then maybe testing the relationship market, or maybe not. But I don't think that men and women would hang out if they didn't have some type of romantic relationship going on. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you've been through hell in relationships, or it didn't fit your mold, maybe you're in the wrong mold. Maybe you just want to be a loner. I mean, guess what? We have a term nowadays called friends with benefits. So you can still enjoy the pleasures of women, and the even casual friendships with women, but if you're going to get into a relationship, a long-term relationship with women, and you're going to get married and it involves children, you're all in, man. You got to be committed if you're a real man. John Burroughs signing off. I know this was confusing. I was all over the place, but ever since that gentleman asked me that question at work years ago, it keeps coming back on my mind. So I don't know how well I explained it, or how, if I even explained it understandably, but I had to get it off my mind. And thank you for listening, if you did listen. John Burroughs signing off.